When digital video transmitters like the original DJI Air unit first came out, one of the first complaints that I had about them was that they were so big and heavy. In fact, I remember thinking, oof, how good could the video possibly be that it's worth all this additional weight? Well, it turns out the video was pretty freaking good, and we learned to live with the weight. But that weight becomes an even bigger challenge when you try to put the digital video transmitter into a micro-sized quadcopter, like this one. This is the BETAFPV PAVO PICO II. PAVO PICO is BETAFPV's 75 to 80 millimeter size class with digital video transmitters in them. And the PAVO PICO II has a DJI O4 Air unit as well as a new updated frame with updated vibration damping materials. In this video, we're going to take it out, we're going to fly it, we're going to see what's up. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. And I want to start right off with some flight footage. I know it's bad YouTube policy to spoil the video right there at the beginning, but I know you guys want to see this thing fly, and I cannot wait to tell you how impressed I am with how good this thing flew. Is it the best flying micro drone ever? I'm sure that belongs to some analog or HD0 micro with 40 billion kV motors weighing just 8 grams. Okay, fine, but especially for a little micro drone with a DJI O4 Air unit on board, it flies pretty good. The pilot, on the other hand, leaves a little bit to be desired. Hey, durability test, that's what I like to call it. I'll go into the details later in the video. We'll do a detailed flight comparison. We'll test out all kinds of things. But long story short, I had moderately mid expectations and got way better than I bargained for. In a lot of ways, the PAVO PICO II is not that different from the PAVO PICOs that came before it. The motors are 1102 in size and 14,000 kV. That 14,000 kV rating is paired with a 2-cell battery and a gem fan 45 millimeter prop to create the power system for the quadcopter. And I got to give BETAFPV credit here. I went back and checked, and 1102 motors at 14,000 kV have been the size and kV rating that has been used on previous PAVO PICOs going back to the DJI O3. Well, technically I think it's only one generation, so it's not like it's been that long. But a lot of times there's a temptation as a manufacturer to just shake things up, to go 15,000 kV or a slightly bigger motor just for the sake of convincing people that you've improved things. This is a pretty solid formula, and kudos to BETAFPV for just sticking with what works. That's not to say that the motors haven't been improved in any way. BETAFPV's marketing material says that this new upgraded lava motor makes 10% more thrust than previous for explosive responsiveness. Well, historically, this drone hasn't exactly been explosive, in large part due to the weight of the digital video transmitter, but 10% more thrust, I guess nobody could complain about that. The diagonal wheelbase of the PAVO PICO is 80 millimeters, and that's important because I flew the PAVO Femto, which is their 75 millimeter durability test, 75 millimeter drone. It also has the DJI O4 Air unit in it, and I found it to be just a little bit too heavy for my taste. It was okay, but I would have liked it, well, if it had just slightly bigger props. The PAVO PICO has 45 millimeter props compared to the 1.6 inch props on the PAVO Femto. By the way, FU to everyone in FPV for mixing metric and imperial units. I guess FU to America for keeping imperial units alive all this time. How stupid is it that this is a 45 millimeter prop, but this is a 1.6 inch, that's 40.6 millimeters, a prop. Oh well, I guess you just get good at converting. The point is, this prop on the PAVO Femto is just slightly not enough for my taste, and I expect that this 45 millimeter prop on the PAVO PICO is going to be, but we'll find out when we fly it. One of the big selling points of the PAVO PICO V2 is the improved mounting system for the O4 Air unit. This drone has the O4 Lite Air unit in it. That's the smaller, lighter one. You can see it's just a single board here compared to the O4 Pro, which is a much thicker, fatter air unit. One of the biggest changes that BETAFPV's made to the PAVO PICO V2 is an improvement to the way that the camera is soft mounted. It's really important to soft mount the cameras for digital video systems because a lot of times the footage from the digital video system is actually going to be your final footage, as opposed to analog systems where a lot of times you'll fly off the analog system, and if there's a little bit of vibration, who cares? And your final footage is actually going to be some other camera, like a GoPro, for example. The previous version of the Pavo Pico soft-mounted the camera here at the camera mount, and the canopy was hard-mounted. And long story short, that was complicated. It was tedious and had a lot of screws to take out if you wanted to change a broken canopy or change out your camera. This method uses 2 screws, very traditional style of camera mounting. By the way, you can also see we've got up tilt adjustment right here, so we can easily adjust the up tilt. And if we need to change this camera out, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws, and it pops right out, just like you would expect with any other camera mounting. The soft mounting is accomplished by soft mounting the whole canopy itself. And it's got these gummies or bobbins, I think they're called, here to soft mount compared to the carbon fiber plate of the frame. So the canopy is isolated from the motors, and in addition, you could argue that the additional mass here is actually going to give more damping and more vibration isolation to the camera. We're going to test it out, and we're going to see how the camera performs, specifically how the image stabilization on the camera performs, and whether this camera can put out good data, especially for use with gyroflow. A lot of times the footage from the O4 Lite is unusable with gyroflow. Gyroflow is a open source third-party image stabilization software, and it relies on gyro data from the camera, and that means if the camera doesn't have good vibration isolation, it just is trash. It just won't work. So we're going to test that out, and that'll be our metric for how good this vibration isolation is. I do want to say, when I first saw these bobbins here, I've used these before for other things, and if there's too much weight on the bobbins, then as soon as the drone crashes, the bobbins rip out, and then they're really a pain in the butt to get back in. It's not the end of the world, but I was a little bit instantly annoyed when I saw them. I'm hoping that the amount of weight on these bobbins is small enough that they don't rip out in a crash and they just do their job perfectly. Now, what you might be thinking is, well, hold on. That's the O4 Lite camera. It's got the very narrow field of view. It doesn't have as good low light sensitivity. I want to use the O4 Pro camera. By the way, if you weren't thinking that because you don't know the differences between the O4 Lite and the O4 Pro camera, I've got a comparison video that I did, and I'll put a link to it in the video description below, and you can check out. You can see just how much you're giving up to get the lighter weight of the O4 Lite camera. Well, if you do want to use the O4 Pro, BETAFPV sells this. This canopy is for use with the O4 Pro. It mounts in here, the camera mounts in here, and this one is a little bit different. You can see there's no spots for the bobbins. Instead, you're going to have some screws and some standard gummies that go through the frame, and it's going to be a little bit more hard mounted. That's probably because the additional weight of the O4 would cause the bobbins to rip out. So good job, BETAFPV. I'm crossing my fingers that you've checked all the boxes and done everything right here. You can actually see an example of that style of mounting here on the Pavo Femto. You can see the canopy is hard mounted with screws, and then it's a little hard to tell on the camera, but we've got these vibration isolating gummies right here that the screw is passing through. Presumably that's exactly how the O4 Pro will mount. I love the fact that the relevant controls of the O4 Lite are accessible through this canopy. Here is the bind button, and here on the other side is the USB port for the O4 Lite. That's a small thing, but some manufacturers get it wrong. Hopefully by this point, BETAFPV has enough experience that they won't, but I still need credit where credit's due. The flight controller is an F4 flight controller. That's pretty typical for stuff in this price range. You could certainly get a little bit more performance if you had an F7 or an H7 processor, but that would add expense and not really give any meaningful performance advantage. So I'm fine with the fact that it's an F4. It does have a voltage regulator for the light air unit, so even though you're using 2-cell batteries, which will go down to 7 volts, it will provide enough voltage to the O4 Lite that the O4 Lite will not brown out. The ESC is a 20 amp ESC, and that should be plenty for these motors and props. The flight controller has built-in 2.4 gigahertz Express LRS, and we can see the Express LRS receiver antenna is this little red piece of wire sticking out here that is soldered to the flight controller. There you go. You can just barely see it, I think. That's what that little red wire is. And I love the fact that they've tucked this up here in a way where it's relatively protected while still sticking out enough to hopefully give good range. The frame comes with a battery tray that is sized perfectly for these BETAFPV Lava 550 milliamp hour batteries. You may roll the dice with some other batteries and see if they will fit in the tray. But for example, Nick Burns says he used some GNB batteries and they were just a little bit too big and they broke the plastic. BETAFPV's webpage does show you having the option of just cutting this plastic here and passing a battery strap underneath. And I love it. I love the fact that they're like, okay, if you want to use our battery, it'll fit perfectly and you can just slide it in and out. But if you prefer to use a strap, then you don't need to do any jury-rigged modification. Just cut it and slide the strap through. Now let's take this thing outside and see how it flies. And I started out with some relatively sedate flying just to see how it would handle smooth, quote-unquote, cinematic style flight. No, what you're looking at isn't very cinematic. It's just my yard. But smooth flying, see if there's any jitters or any weird behavior. This is unstabilized. This is the DVR from the pilot. I do have stabilization turned on in the air unit's local recording, which will be full quality. We got some little twitches here to see how that compares between the stabilized and the unstabilized version. Here's the stabilized version inside the air unit. This is only 1080p recording because the air unit doesn't have a ton of storage. It can record up to 4K. But take a look at how this move looks with stabilization turned on. You can see that those left-right snaps are much more smoothed out. That's what you would expect from stabilization. And the other thing you can see is that the image is much more zoomed in. This is not, again, what it looks like from the pilot's perspective, but the stabilization algorithm has to zoom in order to be able to sort of slide the image around and stabilize it. Let's go back and take a look at this split S, not really a split S. Oh, it's a split S, okay, over the tree to see if there's any shaking or prop wash. And long story short, no, there really wasn't. It was very clean. We'll do it again. And look for the prop wash, look for the shuddering. Not much at all. Also, do you see how the image is a little bit wider? Still not as wide as it would be on the O4 Pro Air unit, but there, I was able to get some out. So I tried and pushed it and was able to get some prop wash by aggressively getting into the throttle. But still, this thing flies pretty well for something so small. As far as flight time goes, here's the first time on a throttle punch out that I got low battery below 3.5 volts. You can see the battery comes back up to 3.6, 3.7 volts fairly quickly. This is on the BETAFPV Lava 550 milliamp hour 2S high volt batteries. I got a total of about 4.5 minutes of flight time. Probably could have pushed it closer to 5 minutes. And frankly, I consider that to be pretty decent for a quadcopter in this size class. You can run it with a 450 milliamp hour battery to get it a little bit lighter, but I found it to be fairly agile and semi-acrobatic, even on the 550. If you do go down to the 450s, you may have to mess with the installation of the battery to make sure it doesn't fall out. In my next flight, I got a little more aggressive with the flying, treating it more like a racing freestyle drone than a cinematic drone. While you're watching that, I'll tell you about the range and penetration. And we're not going to go deep into the range and penetration here because the range and penetration of the O4 Air unit has been well established. It's, long story short, pretty freaking amazing. This flight controller does have a built-in Express LRS receiver, and again, I didn't have any problems with the range and penetration of it either. You can see in the upper left, my LQ is holding at pretty close to 100 no matter where I fly, even when I fly behind the barn or behind the cabin in the yard. I also didn't have problems with a little bit more precise flying, even though the O4 Air unit has higher latency than analog or HD0 systems. This was even without turning on the O4's racing mode, which gets the latency down to about 19 milliseconds. Here, we're just in the standard mode with a latency around maybe 25 to 30 milliseconds. No issues with the latency. If I were to compare it side by side with analog or HD0, I would immediately go, oh, that's much better. But this is certainly usable for most of the things you would want to do with it. Power loops and other moves that involve flinging the drone off throttle are always super different on a lightweight drone than on a heavy 5-inch. And you can see on this one, I had no trouble doing a power loop. No, it's not going to fly just like a 5-inch, but it still can do power loops and stuff very easily. I am really impressed with this little drone. Part of that is because I went into this review with relatively low expectations. Maybe not low. Relatively medium expectations, but it exceeded them. This was a blast to fly. It's not the most powerful or the most athletic little quadcopter of this size that I've flown. I've flown lighter, I've flown more powerful, and I've flown open prop designs, which fly better. But for what it is, it flew really well. It was way better than expected. And the battery did really well. I have a certain amount of voltage sag that I expect to see when I hit the throttle, especially toward the end of the pack, when you're kind of flirting with that 3.5, 3.6 volt, and then you kind of get one last punch out, one last power loop. You expect to see it sagged. I expect to see it sag down to like 3.3, 3.2 volts. And this battery, it went down to like 3.4. I got the low voltage warning, and then boom, it came right back up again, and it was good to go. I could have probably gotten 5 minutes of flying if I had run this battery closer to 0, but I'm so used to these little batteries just dropping out at the end of the pack that I didn't feel like pushing it. Flight time, good. It was able to turtle mode. Every time I crashed it, it was able to turtle mode back up. So like the prop guards are doing a reasonable job of keeping the props clear. I'm really shocked at how good it is. It even did a pretty good job with gyro flow. I guess this soft mounting camera damping works pretty freaking good. There is one caveat, which is all of the flying that I did was with the O4 Lite air unit. And the O4 Lite air unit, it's lighter, obviously, but it has a smaller camera sensor. It has worse low light sensitivity. It has worse image quality. It has less onboard storage. And it famously has a relatively narrow field of view that makes proximity flying and speed flying much more difficult. If you were to use this canopy and then put the O4 Pro on there, don't assume that the flight characteristics will be as good as what I've experienced today. I've flown other drones in the 1.6 inch to 2 inch size class, and I've flown the exact same drone. It was a Flywoo drone with the O4 Lite and the O4 Pro, and it was still okay with the O4 Pro on it, but the O4 Lite, it's like, and with the O4 Pro, it's like, yeah. You know, so it's still a thumbs up, but it's not as enthusiastic of a thumbs up if you decide to go with the O4 Pro. The O4 Pro is going to give you much better low light sensitivity, much better image quality, more storage on board, just better overall. I guess you have to ask yourself what you think the purpose of this little guy is. Is this a micro Cinewhoop for like internal flying, real estate fly-throughs and so forth? At which point the additional weight of the O4 Pro probably isn't going to hurt you that much because you're going to be flying relatively slowly and relatively smoothly, and you want that image quality. Is this a nice sort of compact, does it all, kind of racer, kind of freestyle, kind of whoop? I feel like it suits that pretty well, and as long as you're okay with the field of view of the O4 Lite, this really does well in that way. But if you really want the best performance from the O4 Pro, I don't have an O4 Pro to show you, so I'm just using this canopy as my stand-in. If you really want the best flight performance from the O4 Pro, you're better with a 2-inch prop as opposed to these 45mm props or something smaller. A 2-inch prop is going to carry that weight much more confidently. And in my opinion, a 2-inch prop is just about as small as I feel like gives really good flight performance when carrying the O4 Pro. Obviously, bigger would be better, but that's about as small as I really want to go with the O4 Pro. If you're interested in picking up the BETAFPV PAVO PICO II, I have links in the video description below, and those are not just there for your convenience, so you make sure you're getting the right product, but also they are affiliate links. That means that when you click that link and then make any purchase at the affiliated store, I get a small commission on the purchase. It's a small amount, it doesn't cost you anything extra. They just give it to me instead of keeping that profit. Yeah, it's a small amount, but it does add up, and it really means a lot when you find and click those affiliate links when you do your shopping. In fact, you could just bookmark them and use them anytime you do your shopping. It would mean a lot. Where to next? How good of a flight performance can you get out of like an open-propped quadcopter? I flew a bunch of Flywoo drones in this same size class, some of them open-propped, some of them closed-propped, with the O4 Lite and the O4 Pro. And if you're looking for something to compete with the BETAFPV PAVO PICO, I think you owe it to yourself to check them out. And I'll put a card on screen and a link in the video description below. If you can't see the card, you can go check that video out as well. See you there.